So many people in the Jewish community don't really appreciate what we have. They've had to sacrifice so much to be able to join our people, and they see that so many of us who were born into Judaism don't really fully appreciate. One of the things that we all know that we have as Jews is a sense of mission. We as Jewish people were put into this world by God with a very holy mission. God said the Jewish people are a holy nation and a kingdom of priests. And priests are teachers. We are here to be teachers to the world. And our Holy Bible tells us in the prophet Zechariah that before the coming of Mashiach, 10 people from every nation of the world are going to grab hold of a Jew and say, we want to follow you because we've heard that God is with you. It's so difficult for us to imagine that people are going to want to come to us and ask us to teach them about God, that for all of our history, the world has wanted to destroy us. And yet the Torah tells us that one day the world is going to turn to us and ask us to teach them about how to have a relationship with God. It was always difficult to imagine throughout Jewish history that this would ever happen. It sounded like science fiction. And yet now we're living in a time where this is taking place in our lifetime. The Rambam, Maimonides, said something very, very strange and interesting in his Yad HaChazakah. When he speaks, it's in a censored passage, when he speaks about both Christianity and Islam, he says that it might be part of God's inscrutable way of running the world that he allows Christianity and Islam to spread as a way of ultimately preparing the world for the ultimate truth of the true Mashiach and the true religion of Yahadut, of Judaism. And so tonight's story is a very important story, because we'll be hearing tonight from someone who went through this journey, someone who was raised as a Christian, someone who spent his life as a very involved and dedicated and serious Christian, and somehow Yehudah Tebbitt's journey within Christianity led him miraculously to Judaism. Very happy and proud to introduce to you Yehudah Tebbitt, who will be sharing what I think will be a most fascinating story.
Thank you, Rabbi Stern and Rabbi Skobak. Thank you to Julius, Sis, and for all of you for coming tonight. I thought a lot about how I was going to present everything that has gone on over the last 20 years in a single hour tonight. And the truth is that if I tried to compact it all into this single hour, it would not be possible, because there's too many stories to tell. So I've decided to just kind of shoot from the hip and tell you kind of from beginning to end and what comes to the fore. Excuse me? I apologize. So what comes to the fore is what I will share with you tonight. So I want to start out by mentioning something that Maimonides taught. Maimonides taught that one of the principal ways that we can know Hashem, that we can know God and perceive God, is through his works, through his deeds in the world and in the universe. And so tonight I hope that all of the things that myself and my family have been through on our way to Judaism can be displayed as a work of God, as something which we merely were walking out, but that the Creator of the universe was orchestrating on our behalf. And so with that, I will begin. We just started going into Sefer Shemot, where we have the story of our people becoming a nation, going from slavery from slavery to freedom, from the darkness of Egypt to the light of relying on the creator of the universe. And this story is not just the story of our people, but it's the story of my family as well. When people ask me how long my conversion took, how long it took me to convert, I usually tell them about 10 years. And then they usually give me a funny look, because normally when somebody goes to a rabbi and says, I want to convert, if they seriously learn and study and practice Judaism, it's usually about 18 months to 2 years. And it's usually a pretty abrupt change from their old religion to the new religion, and they find themselves Jewish in very little time in comparison. However, our journey took many paths and many directions, and I've often wondered why. Some of the things I'll share with you are just, it's like if it wasn't true, you'd think it was fiction. But I want to share again from Maimonides. When he wrote in his Guide to the Perplexed, he talks about the principle of meeting mankind where they're at and leading them accordingly. He says, it is not possible to go from one extreme to the opposite extreme in a single moment, and therefore it is not fitting, according to man's nature, that he will forsake everything to which he is accustomed in a single moment. And this is something which is precisely similar to a principle which is already stated in the Torah, where it says, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, for it was closer. And God said, lest the people change their minds by seeing the ravages of war and return to Egypt. And so God led the people in a roundabout manner, by the way of the wilderness of the Sea of Reeds. And behold, Hashem led in a roundabout manner away from a direct path, which was the original aim, for fear of what the people's bodies were not able to naturally sustain, to another path, in order that his original aim would be realized. So we were led in quite a roundabout way. And as we have looked back, and as my wife and I have discussed these things many, many times at length, we realize that this was merely Hashem's wisdom in leading us to where he would have us. My story really doesn't start 10 years ago. It starts when I was about 9 years old. I was born to nominally Christian parents in Minneapolis, Minnesota. They were both raised in not very religious homes, and we didn't go to church much as very young children. But when I was about 9 years old, my father was in his early 30s, and through spiritual searching of his own, had a classic born-again experience and decided to dedicate his life to Christianity. Upon this change in his life, he decided to take my brother and I to regular church services, Sundays, Wednesdays, and I took to it very, very quickly. At about the age of 9 is when my father entrusted me with the Bible, and upon entrusting me with this Christian Bible containing Old and New Testaments, he told me that this book was perfect, and that it held no contradictions, and that it held all of the answers to spiritual life and truth. And so I took this Bible and I began to study it intensively. I took it everywhere with me. It was at school, it was on the school bus, and when I didn't have it with me, I was thinking about it. And throughout my going to different classes and throughout my study, I began opening up commentaries, I began looking at history, and I showed myself to be somewhat of a prodigy in Christianity. When I entered my teen years, I began to really desire to study the Bible to a point where I would know it all cold, and that everything would fit together, and that I would really reach that perfection that I had been told about when I originally had encountered this book, which so enthralled me. And when I was 16 years old, I gave my first sermon, and after that I began to regularly fill in for the pastor when he was gone. And even in my early years in church, I had questions. I always had questions, and I could never find satisfying answers. One particular question that I asked, I was probably 14 or 15 years old, and I asked the youth leader at the time, I said, you know, I was reading in the Gospels in the New Testament where Jesus is approached by a rich young ruler, and the rich young ruler says, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, why do you call me good? No one's good except for God alone. And I said, now why would somebody who we supposedly believe is the Son of God, the incarnation of God himself, why would he say, why do you call me good? I'm not good. God is good. It seems like he's saying he's not God. To which the youth leader replied, well, you know, this guy who approached him didn't know he was God, so if he admitted he was God, then it would have looked pretty, you know, like he was being arrogant, so he denied that he was, and he went through this whole thing, and I had questions like this, and I always got answers like that. And they never satisfied, they never answered the question. So by the time I graduated high school, I was planning to be a pastor in full-time ministry. And as a part of that, I enrolled in a 2-year post-high school Bible school program in Plymouth, Minnesota. And I continued my journey. And although I had been raised in a Lutheran church, I had always been encouraged to just be a free thinker and read the Bible for myself and to learn it for myself and to believe what it says. So I never learned things from a catechism, and I never learned things by rote. And so when I finally got into a doctrine class and they began talking about, you know, how infants go to hell if they're not sprinkled with water when they're born, and how breads and wafers turn into the body and blood of the Messiah and all this kind of thing, I couldn't accept it, and I began to just cut class. I spent most of my time in the seminary library. I would research. I would check out stacks of books and bring them back to my dorm room to study. It was around this time I started to teach myself New Testament Greek from different grammar books with the intent of really understanding the text from where it came from and really understanding it in its original language. It was at the same school that I met my wife, and after the first year I dropped out of the program and I married her, and I had determined to go about the ministry in a very untraditional way. I had been involved in non-denominational Christianity, which at that time, now they have seminaries. At that time, they favored more organic leadership, non-seminary trained leadership. And so I decided to go that route. And my wife and I were attracted to each other mainly because we were both seekers. She also asked questions. We were just talking last night about one of the questions she asked one of her professors. Is she said, you know, before Jesus came, how did all of those Jews in the Old Testament get saved? How did they go to heaven? And the rabbi said, well, they had the covenant of circumcision. And she said, yeah, but what about the girls? And he didn't have an answer. So both of us being very hungry for truth and wanting to really find out what was the real biblical religion. And at that time in our minds, what was the real Christianity? What's going on here? So after we got married, we began looking for a church. And we didn't have a good experience with that. We walked out of more churches than we ever sat through service in. I remember 2 of them in particular. One of the first ones we went to advertised that the sermon was going to be about Joshua leading the children of Israel across the Jordan, and they were going to continue their study of the book of Joshua. I was excited. I brought a notebook. I brought a pen, I brought my Bible, I opened up my Bible, and the pastor got up and said, I want to talk to you today about crossover moments in all of our lives. At which point I groaned and went, oh, come on. And halfway through a sermon which didn't contain much of any value, my wife and I ironically left the church to have breakfast at a bagel shop. And we ended up studying the book of Joshua amongst our bagels with a schmear. Another church we went into was a megachurch. It had a pretty good reputation, so we had heard. We walked in, and everywhere we tried to sit down, people would growl at us and say that the seats were taken. Even though there was 20 seats there, they were all taken. We finally sat down, and the preacher came out and started talking about how when the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary to tell her that she was going to be the mother of Jesus, that he scared her because the angel didn't know how to talk to women. At which point, my wife and I looked at each other, we both groaned, and again headed to the bagel shop. So the groaning and the bagel eating continued for quite a while, until my wife suggested that we try a small non-denominational church that her parents attended in Maple Lake, Minnesota. And this is really where the story takes a turn. Now you have to understand that by this time, I had most of the New Testament committed to memory. And I also knew most of the Greek behind the passages and could converse in it. But I knew almost nothing about the Jewish Bible. When we went to this church, I ended up volunteering with the youth group, and in short order became the youth pastor. And through a series of events, they asked the regular pastor to leave, and they asked me to step in as the regular pastor of the church. And it was during this time that I was really starting to ask myself a major question. Something that I saw in the Christian Bible that just didn't stem and I could not escape, no matter which system of Christian theology I ascribed to, was that the two just couldn't be meshed together. You had to throw out one or the other. You had to cut out passages, and you had to sweep some others under the rug. You couldn't get a systematic, clean whole where everything worked together. It just seemed impossible. And for me, it was an obsession. I lost sleep every night. I thought about these things all the time, constantly. My wife would tell me, "Can't we talk about something normal like the Dodgers?" I said, "Honey, we've never talked about the Dodgers, and we live in Minnesota. That's a California baseball team." She said, "I don't care. I just want to talk about something else for a change." It was constantly at the fore for me. But the question that I kept getting is, as you read the Tanakh, the Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament, as I knew it then, the consistent message was obedience to God's laws by the Jewish people, who are supposed to affirm an absolute oneness and incorporeality of God. Whereas the consistent message of the New Testament was get rid of God's law, get rid of the Jewish people, and believe that God is not one but three, and He was corporeal. I couldn't understand it. And I finally came to a point where I said the law has to mean something. When King David wrote Psalm 119, and you have to understand that for Christians, the prophets, King David, King Solomon, all of these people are considered righteous people by them, and almost like proto-Christians. To the early church, these people were proto-Christians. It's like they were Christians before their time. So King David is called a man after God's own heart, and so he's supposed to be this, the writer of the Psalms was supposed to be this kind of proto-Christian. He knew what was coming before it came. And I said, if that's true, then why is it that he's writing in Psalm 119, "Oh God, how I love your law"? Shouldn't he say, "Oh God, how I love Jesus," or "Oh God, how I love your grace," or "Oh God, how I love the New Testament," or something else other than the law? But instead, he sings the praises for the entire psalm about the obedience to God's law and how the Jewish people have such a gift and we can cleanse our ways with God's Torah. So I initially said there has to be something to this, and so I said the 10 Commandments, that's as far as I was. Well, the 10 Commandments have to be true, and they have to be enforced, and they can't be optional. Christians should do these things. Which I readily brought to church, and when I told them that they had to, keep the Sabbath and things like this, they looked at me funny. And after saying it for a while, I started to look at me funny too. Because as anybody knows, we changed it to Sunday. Because, Jesus was raised on a Sunday, and the Jews used to have Saturday, but now we have Sunday and this. But when God gave the 10 Commandments, he didn't know about Jesus and Sunday, or at least the Jews that he was talking to didn't. So this didn't make any sense and caused more questions. It came around to Easter time. And my father had, in his spiritual awakening, had gotten involved with Christian Zionism, believing that Jews were the chosen people of God. He still believes so. Jews are the chosen people of God, that the land of Israel belongs to them, And as a part of that, we were involved in demonstration seders done at our church by Jews for Jesus. And I always knew, I didn't know the details, but I always knew that the Last Supper was really a Passover Seder. And so I had gotten a used book when I was in school that I hadn't really read, ironically put out by Jews for Jesus, called Christ and the Passover. It was written by their founder who just passed away. And I said, you know what, I'm going to do an Easter message unlike any other Easter message that I think's ever been done. I want to do something really original. So I went and I got that book out, and I started reading it. And for the first time, I realized that the first Christians were really Jews. And they did Jewish things. And they did Jewish things for a couple hundred years. Until the non-Jewish church came and changed the calendar and decided to separate from the Jews and replace the Jewish holidays with pagan holidays. I was completely floored. In fact, I remember exactly where I was, sitting in my kitchen at my table with my books all spread out, writing up the notes for this sermon. And I leaned back in my chair and looked into the living room where my wife was nursing our oldest. And I said, honey, we've been lied to. And she kind of said, okay. Oh, that's nice. But I realized what I had been missing. What I had been missing is two things. I had been missing really one thing in two forms. I had been missing the facts of history. The facts of the last 2,000 years I had never been shown. In fact, I remembered at that point, the question that I asked myself was, why didn't I hear this stuff in Bible school? We did a survey of Jewish history, and I look back at the textbook that we used for that survey of not Jewish history, church history, excuse me, and I look back at the survey of that, and this is how it went. God started out with the Jewish people, and by the way, this is the reason why the Christian Bible is rearranged differently than the Tanakh. If you look at the Old Testament, according to Christianity, it starts out with creation, and then Abraham and everything, and you go through all the prophets, the ups and downs. Finally, it ends with Malachi. In our Bible, 2 Chronicles is last, but in their Bible, it's Malachi, and God is saying, what's wrong with you, and you've offended me, and the priests have offended me, and that's where it stops. And then what's the next book? Matthew. Jesus shows up. And what they tell you is that those were called the silent years. The gap between the prophet Malachi and the Gospel of Matthew were the silent years. God didn't speak to the Jewish people. But what they don't understand is that during those years was the Maccabee revolt and the miracle of Hanukkah. And then when you get into the Christian side, they taught church history like this. Wow, there was Jesus, and then there was the apostles, and then there was Martin Luther. And they skipped 1,000 years, 1,200 years. But what's found within those 1,200 years is rivers of Jewish blood. And co-opting our scriptures and changing the truths that God gave us. And I began to read about these things. And my initial gut reaction was, I was angry that I hadn't been told these things. I was angry that they'd been glossed over. And I started to find in Christian history something that I just could not accept. And I said, if this is really the religion of the Bible, if this is really God's will, then I'd rather be an atheist. This can't be it. I will not serve a God who treats people this way. Not only that, but it seemed to me to be a big cruel joke. Here you have a God who brings a people out of Egypt saying, I will be your God, you will be my people, I will have a covenant with you, I will love you, I will bless you. All you have to do is you have to keep my Torah. You keep my Torah, and you hold fast to me, and I will do right by you. And when they would go astray, he would send prophets saying, you got to get back on the right track. If you don't get back on the right track, the Babylonians are going to come, the Assyrians are going to come, you're going to have famine and war and pestilence and everything else. And so they go into exile and they come back, and then they get the northern, they go to the Assyria and they don't come back, and the temple's destroyed, you know, and then Jesus comes and goes, ha, just kidding. I was just giving you all of those rules to show you that you're really imperfect and you could never do it. And so you should just forget all of that and believe in me. What kind of a father does that to a child? I couldn't accept it. It seemed to me to be like a father taking his child outside under the moon and asking him to flap his arms and fly to the moon. And if you don't flap your arms and fly to the moon, I'm going to beat you. And I'm going to beat you until you do it. And then the child, sweaty brow, flaps his arms as hard as he could, can't get anywhere, and the father beats him, and then he says, I'm just kidding. I was just showing you that you couldn't really flap your arms and fly to the moon. The troubling thing is that in Deuteronomy, at the end of the book, he says, these things are not far from you. These things are not up in heaven. These things are not across the sea. But these things are near you, in your mouth and in your heart, so that you are able to do them. And so this system that I had ascribed to totally began to break down. And I said, that's it. The Torah has to be important. The whole Torah has to be important. But understanding that the first Christians were Jews opened up an entire new world to me in what I figured into my religious system. Excuse me. So, what many people do who go down the path that I went down and my family went down is that I was raised to believe in this religion. And the vast majority of what I've been taught, I had now been disillusioned by. But there were still some things that made sense to me. Jesus being the Messiah, why couldn't he be? There was nothing to me that I knew then and told me that he couldn't be. And, going to heaven, okay, so fine, so I didn't drop everything right away. What made sense to me is that you should mix the two. So where did that lead me? That led me to the Messianic movement. And I began to devour everything that I could find in the Messianic movement, and to understand that Jesus and his original followers were really Jewish. And so I began to devour everything. But what I quickly learned about the Messianic movement is that the Torah, for by and large, and it's a little different now, but by and large the Messianic movement uses the Torah as a front. They don't really care about obeying. They're just, hey, it's Jewish, so let's be schmaltzy, and we'll eat matzah on Passover, and we'll, have wine on Shabbat, and, we'll drive to shul, and, still eat our bacon, or whatever it is. They would rail about Christian anti-Semitism while eating a cheeseburger. This didn't make sense to me. So again, I found myself dissatisfied, but I didn't see really an option. So during this time, the church that I had been a part of had financial problems from long before we got there. They started as a split from a congregation, and Baruch Hashem, they ended as a split from a congregation. In fact, that church right now is a garage door factory, and it has never served a better purpose ever since its existence. But these things were very new, and I began to share them at the church where I was at. And when they had a meeting and said they were closing down, I stood up and announced, I'm going to start a new church over in the school, and anybody who wants to come with me, we're going to explore this whole thing with Jesus and the Torah and Judaism. There's something here. And so I had about 3 or 4 people come with me, and then we started to have other people attend. It was very small, however. So I began to share what I was learning, and we went through all kinds. Pardon me. You had to give me seltzer, didn't you, Julius? And so during this time, our family started going through some pretty serious changes, some practical changes. We started to keep a semblance of basic dietary laws. We didn't eat pork, we didn't eat shellfish. We stayed away from unclean things from Leviticus 11. We started to acknowledge the Shabbat. We didn't understand everything about it, but we started to acknowledge it. I began to wear tzitzit and a kippah. I began looking at the Hebrew calendar, examining the festivals. How do you do the festivals? And also during this time, I began to leave behind several classic doctrines of Christianity. The Trinity, the prayer to or the worship of Jesus, the damnation of anyone not believing in Jesus, especially Jews. I didn't believe that. And the idea that, you get the world to come, just by belief, not through what you do. You can be a horrible, despicable person. If you have the right beliefs, that's where you go. And so as a result, almost a year later, they had a meeting, and they said, you can't teach here anymore. Your family can't attend here anymore. I said, how come? They said, look at you. You're too Jewish. This is a church. And looking back on it, they were absolutely correct. I showed up to the meeting with tzitzit and a yarmulke. And these things that I left behind troubled them as well. In fact, one person came up to me and said, you know what, Pastor Brian? I'm not ready to give up my Christmas tree. I don't want to give up my Easter ham. Someone also told me, I don't want to give up my bloody steak. And so instead of being interesting, I quickly became unpopular. Also, privately, I began to have looming doubts as to the canonicity of the New Testament and the whole idea of the virgin birth of Jesus. So I called my wife, and she said, but where are we going to go? I said, well, I heard about this Messianic congregation, and we'll try it out. We'll see how it goes. So I went there, and our first time there, we found ourselves in the middle of a congregational split. And we decided to go with the ones who were splitting, just simply because they were nicer. They were being thrown out. They weren't really leaving, so that told me that I didn't want to be the next one to be thrown out. I'd rather go with them first off. And it's there where I met a man named Daniel Lancaster. And him and I became fast friends. Daniel Lancaster is currently the head of teaching and education for a Messianic ministry called First Fruits of Zion. And he decided that he wanted me to help him on certain projects. And so I began helping him on different projects, and very quickly became a source of research for them. And I actually aspired to work for them full-time as a teacher, but I was considered too edgy and too radical in my ideas, because one of the things that I refused to do was hide. I had worked so hard, and I had given up so much for truth that I wasn't going to hide it all inside. In fact, when we first started to acknowledge the Shabbat, I went to work and I told them I can't work Friday nights into the Shabbat anymore. And that didn't go over so well. And then eventually it came around to Yom Kippur, and I had scheduled it, and they said, you have to work it anyways. And I ended up giving them a notice after a lot of back and forth, and I took my, what do they do? They cashed me out, and I took my check, and I walked out the door. And that started a reaction. I had lost the income that I had from the church. And I also began a yearly thing where the joke was, oh, the high holidays are coming up, you'll be either quitting or fired soon. Because I just refused to work on those Yomim Tovim. So I had given up so much, I wasn't going to keep the truth to myself. And so I was very open about the questions I had and about the facts that I had found. And along the way, a lot of people ended up walking away from the Messianic movement because of the things that I had shared with them. And so I was considered a very dangerous person. But at the same time, you keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And I ended up doing a lot of consulting work for them. And because of my knowledge of historical Jesus studies and academics and also rabbinic literature, I ended up doing a lot of consulting for them. In fact, Rabbi Skobak just showed me something that he got from them just currently, which contains I would have to say a good third of it contains ideas that I shared with them several years ago. So that's kind of how they kept me close. And over the next 4 years, I began to study and familiarize myself with classical Jewish literature, which I'd never encountered before. I'd only encountered internet articles and books in the Judaica section at Barnes & Noble. But I started to read books like the Mishnah, the Talmuds, the Midrash, the Mechilta, Sifra, Sifrei, the Zohar, Hasidus, Halacha, and other types of things. And our family ended up taking a very decidedly rabbinic path. And if any of you have ever had any contact with Messianics, most of them are pretty Karaite in their approach, which means they don't accept Jewish tradition or Jewish oral law. So during this time, we were driving back and forth to this Messianic congregation, which ended up being in Shoreview, Minnesota. Only because of our kosher, I wouldn't let my kids eat at the meal that they had. And when playing outside, I wouldn't let my children do some of the things or play with some of the toys that they had. And because my wife covered her hair, a lot of the women didn't want to talk to her. And I was one of maybe 3 or 4 families, young families, who were kind of going down the same road. During this time, I started to understand that I didn't believe in the incarnation or the deity of Jesus. Pardon me. I didn't accept the canonicity of the New Testament. I didn't even really believe in the salvation by the death of Jesus on a cross. And I didn't believe that there was another people of God outside of the people of God expressed in the Bible. I began to see Jesus as his history presents him to us, as somebody killed by the Romans and not the founder of a new Gentile religion. And I began to doubt things like the resurrection of Jesus. In fact, by this time I had started to have looming doubts about the entire system to which I had subscribed. But we pressed on. And after we were ousted at this congregation through a sermon that was particularly pointed at this group of young families, we decided that it was time to just move on and to move into the same neighborhood. So we moved into the same neighborhood, and we said, if we move in the same neighborhood, we can homeschool our kids together. We can all keep kosher. We can all keep Shabbat. We used to pray in someone's 3-season porch. We had a mechitza. The women would sit behind the mechitza. 2 of the guys learned how to lane. One would lane the Torah. One would lane the prophets. We would wear talit. On weekdays we wore tefillin. And we would make the bracha. We were really practicing for the next step. And when I say that I left behind these different beliefs, the reason why I did so is not so much because of theology. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't take a very deep look into the Jewish Bible to realize that it does not support a single major doctrine of Christianity at all. It's contrived. It's based on mistranslation. It's not hard. The Trinity goes out. God is not a man, that he's not, God is one, this type of thing. Messiah has to actually do something. He can't just show up and do a few miracles, pull a rabbit out of a hat, and yay, he's not only Messiah, he's God. It doesn't work. So it wasn't really theological, but what it is that if you look into history, take the virgin birth, for example. If you look into Judaism prior to Christianity, there's no mention of a virgin birth concept at all in any Jewish tradition, writing, thought at all, ever. And if you look after, it's not in Jewish writings. But if you flip the context from Jewish to Roman, or from Jewish to non-Jewish, you'll find that there's virgin birth myths from ancient Egypt and Babylon, all the way through Greece and Rome, and all the way up to the present day with Buddhism and Hinduism. Anybody who was anybody in the non-Jewish world was born without a father. That included the Caesars, that included kings, that included philosophers. And so it became very apparent to me that just a lot of these things were just simply not Jewish. They didn't stim. And so they were very easy to leave behind when it came to really looking at what happened in history. I mean, the world today is not as cloistered as it used to be. It used to be that a person could grow up in a small farming town in North Dakota, live there his whole life and die there, and the only thing that he would be exposed to is what he was exposed to in his daily life and the books at the local library. And if he happened to go into the pastor's library, he could read the religious books at church. And that's what he knew about the world. That and what he learned at school. The world was a very big place. And if you didn't travel, you wouldn't know much about the world. It's a very different place today. I'm telling you that today, without the internet, and without publishing as massive and as far and wide as it happens in our world today, I wouldn't be here. Because you can get anything today. You can learn about history today. The church doesn't have the imperial power to burn you at the stake if you disagree with them today. So you're free to question things, you're free to read things, and it's not just in Latin, it's not just in Greek. You can get it in English, you can get it in Spanish. It's a very small world today. And that's why we see I'm not a, what do we call it? I'm not a fetish. There's lots of people that have a very similar story to me. And the reason why you see it more often now than you used to is because everything is right at your fingertips. If you want to know, you can Google it. If you want to know about Christian history, you can Google it. And in the same 5-minute span, you can find out what happened 2,000 years ago in the Jewish world and the non-Jewish world. So this congregation continued for about 10 months. And after about 10 months, the congregation that we had all left ended up moving to Hudson, Wisconsin. And it's still there today. They bought a building, they weren't renting anymore. It was in a nice old part of the neighborhood. There was a lot of things for rent. There were a lot of houses for sale. It was a very easy place to build a community. So they could have the same thing that we had in Anoka, Minnesota, only cheaper. And there was more people doing it. And so they decided to take a vote as to whether or not they were going to relocate. I could see what was coming. If we relocated, it was going to disband. I couldn't afford to move. We took the vote, I was against it, I was outvoted, and everybody left. So besides us, there was a Jewish family in the neighborhood who I had actually begun to counsel them to leave Messianic Judaism and to return to their people. I said, you know what, I'm a goy, okay? I have to wade through all of this mess. You're Jewish. If I was Jewish, I would not be here right now. So I ended up answering a lot of their questions, confirming a lot of their doubts, and Baruch Hashem, they got in touch with Aish, and they're making Aliyah today. But other than that family, which we didn't see that often, for the next almost 2 years, we were virtually alone. It was a very lonely time. But over that next 2 years was a time of intense introspection. And it was a time when I really decided that I wanted to convert and that I was despairing of this religion. You have to understand where I was. I didn't believe in the New Testament anymore. What I believed in was what academics called the Q gospel, which is basically where you thresh out sayings of Jesus that seem to be Jewish in origin, and you say that these are authentic and the rest is just later Christian interpretation. How do you know if it's Jewish? Well, if you can find a similar statement in the Mishnah or the Talmud or the Midrash or classical Jewish sources, then it's authentic. I didn't believe that he was God. I didn't believe that he was the Messiah. I didn't believe that he died on the cross. I didn't believe that he was born of a virgin. I didn't believe that he raised from the dead. I didn't believe that he was anything but a rabbi of his time. So I started to say to myself, this isn't real. This isn't real. If he is what Christianity says he is, if the Christian religion, that doesn't work for me. I've already accepted Judaism. if he's not, and he's this page and a half of scattered phrases that I can find in the Mishnah anyways, what am I doing? I'm putting my whole family and my future and everything for this little world that only I belong to. And it was at that time that I said that this was never meant to be. I read the final writing on the wall, and I said to my wife that I want to convert. But we didn't know how to do it. You have to understand that for 7 years, from that first Easter message that I prepared, for 7 years, I never talked to a rabbi, ever. And the reason why is because the Messianic movement, as well as the church which preceded it, knows that it's dangerous when their congregates go talking to Orthodox rabbis. If you read the minutes from every church council from the 3rd century on, a consistent theme is don't hang out with Jews, don't take matzah from Jews, don't talk to rabbis, don't have anything to do with their festivals. Because every time they did, Christians would leave in droves. You want to know where, here's something interesting. You want to know where the term Christ killer came from? You want to know where that originated? It originated with a Christian named St. John Chrysostom. He came to Antioch in the early, I think late 2nd century, early 3rd century. He came to Antioch, Turkey, one of the largest Christian communities in the ancient world. And you know what he found there? He found Christians in the synagogue. He found Christians asking questions of rabbis. He found Christians asking rabbis to write amulets for them, which is a popular practice of the day. He found Christians going to synagogue, praying with Jews, eating with Jews, celebrating Passover with Jews. And it seems that he thought that this was absolutely unacceptable. And there has to be a difference, because what was happening is that they were rapidly finding out that this faith that they had accepted was really Jewish, and they started wanting to be Jewish. So he gave a series of sermons wherein he said the reason why we can't have anything to do with them is, after all, they killed Jesus. And so therein, started the accusation of us being Christ killers. They know, like the church that preceded them, that if you go talking to Orthodox rabbis, pretty soon you're going to start hanging out at the synagogue, and you're going to say, "Oh, I'm just going to learn Torah," and you're going to start praying with them because, hey, after all, I want to learn how to pray in Hebrew. Pretty soon you'll just leave this Messianic thing, and they'll be out whatever you put in the coffers, and they'll be out their numbers, and it's embarrassing to them. And so what they tell you is you don't want to talk to rabbis, because even if you convert, the best you'll ever be is a second-class citizen. They treat you like garbage. They treat you badly. And the nice ones, they're few and far between. They'll reject you. You don't want anything to do with them. So as educated as my wife and I were in our position, we were deathly afraid. I remember the first time that I talked to a rabbi. It was Rabbi Goldberger of Knesset Yisrael in St. Louis Park. One of the sweetest men I've ever met, and I continue to talk to him today. In fact, when we went back for Thanksgiving to visit family, I ended up davening at the shul and was able to see him again. And he stops into Milwaukee from time to time. But he didn't know me from Adam. And I called him ready to be just lambasted with, "Well, who do you think you are?" and everything else. I couldn't talk. It was like I had drank seltzer. Just kidding. I could barely get the words out. But he was so sweet. He said, "How would you like to meet next Sunday? Please come. I'd love to talk to you." He said, "You can come here. You're free to bring your children here and participate in the programs. If you want to convert, they only do conversions in Chicago and New York. We don't really do them here." And so he said, "You'll have to talk to it, but we'd be happy to have you." And my wife and I, after he said, "I have some other things to attend to," and he left, we just cried. We just cried. Because we couldn't believe what we had just experienced. And every single Orthodox rabbi since that time that we've ever come to know has been absolutely 100% good to us and sweet to us and has treated us better than a first-class citizen. then our spiritual life took an interesting turn. It was during this time I became unemployed. I got laid off. I was working for a tile setting company. And when the real estate in America took a turn, we were called off the jobs, and I was laid off. So through a friend of ours who had been kind of doing a little bit of book work for a Hasidic couple in St. Paul, said, you know what, they need a warehouse manager. You know, their first language was Yiddish. They needed somebody who could, you know, write letters and emails and things. They had a business. They said, you know, you could come, you could manage their business, and they really like you. So I show up to the interview. The man's name is Berka. He's a very sweet man. But he's sitting on a chair. He's very short. He's sitting on a chair and he's smoking. And he says, Yarmulke, tzitzis, what's your story? So I went through the whole thing and everything else, and he goes, I think you're nuts. But I like you. You're hired. So from that point on, we began engaging in conversation. And he ended up talking to Rabbi Manis Friedman. He was a Chabad rabbi in St. Paul. And so he ended up talking to Rabbi Manis Friedman about me. He said, this guy that's working for me, this guy is Meshuggah. He looks like a Jew, talks like a Jew, acts like a Jew, knows how to discuss Hasidus and Halacha and the whole thing, whereas Yarmulke tzitzis won't eat treif. I don't understand why he wants to pay $3 more for a pound of hamburger. And the saddest thing about it is he can't get a good job because he won't work on Shabbos. So Rabbi Friedman said, just be good to him. I know about these types of people. And so what Berka began to do was engage me in a different kind of conversation, which at first seemed very abrupt, but later on I saw its wisdom. This was just right before I ended up talking to Rabbi Goldberger. But he started down a different track. He said, you know, haven't you ever heard of the Sheva Mitzvahs? Haven't you heard of B'nai Noach? I said, yeah, I've heard of it. I want more than that, you know. By this time, we were keeping Shabbos. We had mezuzahs on our door. I wore talis, tefillin. I davened 3 times a day. We didn't eat meat and milk together. We had kosher kid, the whole thing. The only thing I didn't do was toivel our dishes and everything, because I knew that if we converted, we'd have to buy all new dishes and the whole thing. But for all intents and purposes, we were from Goyim, if that makes sense. So he knew he wasn't getting to me this way, so he started down an even different path. He said, you know what you are? He said, you know I like you, but you're arrogant. Do you think God made a mistake? He made you a goy. You're supposed to be a goy. You want to be a Jew, he made you a goy. You need to be a goy. So after the first few times, I said, no, and then it began to get to me, and I began to think about it. This is the first real Orthodox Jew that I've ever known. Could this be that God is giving me a message? Maybe he's speaking to me. Maybe he's speaking to me through that. Maybe all of this trouble that I've been through. I even told him, I said, do you have any idea what we've been through to keep Shabbos? We've eaten so little, and we've lived in basements because we've given up everything because. And he said, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know if you have an excuse to treat your family like that. He was very harsh. And so it started to get to me, and I told my wife, I said, maybe he's right. She said, whoa, what are you talking about? I said, maybe he's right. Maybe we never tried to live that way. Maybe we should live that way. You don't have to convert to be a Ben Noach. Here we are. We would be doing what God created us to do. Maybe that's what we've been missing this whole time. So she very, very cautiously, outwardly went with. She later told me that inside she was screaming. But we broke it to the kids. You know, we're not going to do Shabbos anymore. I took all the mezuzahs down. I had payas at the time. I cut off my payas. I took off my kippah, my tzitzit, everything. I took it all. I gave it away to Jews that I knew. I gave away sforim that I had. The only thing that I couldn't bring myself to do was eat treif meat. Couldn't do it. But we started to live that way. And we started to say, you know, our focus is really on just being basic, good, ethical people. And at first there was this excitement. You know, I'm not trying to be something anymore. I am, you know, this whole thing. And then depression set in. And started in very, very subtly and got more and more. And after about 5 or 6 months of this, I didn't want to get up in the morning. I would just sit on the couch and I would cry, and I would not cry, and then I would cry again. My wife was calling my friends, "You gotta call Brian, you gotta talk to him. He's in a bad way." You know, and she's trying to maintain, the kids are trying to, you know, this, and I just couldn't. I'm like, God, I'm trying. But what occurred to me is that there was nothing to live for. When I got up in the morning, there was no prayers to say. There's no morning brachot. There's nothing. I can go through the day, and the only thing left for me to do is just be a nice person and live the American dream. Get a good job, you know, treat my wife and my kids nice. But there's no holidays. And also, you should know that if you're a real Ben Noach, you don't have Jewish holidays, and you're not allowed to make your own holidays. So you really have nothing. So a friend of mine, who today is a very happy Ben Noach, is totally fine with it, because everybody's neshama is different, said, "You know what? Hanukkah's coming up. I got this great thing from a rabbi down south who handles B'nai Noach in like Texas, and it's this Noahide Hanukkah thing. It's the whole liturgy in English for how to properly, you know, celebrate Hanukkah for non-Jews." So I started to think to myself, you know what? I think I can get through this. If I can just say a bracha and light the candle, I think I'll be okay. Just that one thing. I just want to do a mitzvah. That's all I want to do. And so my wife said, "Okay, the latkes are ready. You know, come to the table, everybody." The Hanukkah was set up and everything. And I opened up to the page, and I had the shamash there, and the bracha went something like, "Blessed are you, Lord their God, King of their universe, who did all this great stuff for them. It has nothing to do with me. I don't know why I'm standing here lighting a candle. I'm not even Jewish." I became very angry. I cleared the table, and I said, "I will not live like this anymore." I went into my room, and in the back of my closet, I kept an old ratty pair. I didn't give them away. I used to go to work in them. An old ratty pair of CC. I used to stand and every once in a while go in there and just hold them, and I used to just wanted to put them on. But you can't wear CC if you're not Jewish, if you're a Ben Noach. It's not proper. But I went right in there, I put on a hat, because I gave all my yarmulkes away, and I put on my CC, and I laid down and I went to sleep. And the next morning, I came out and I told my family, "We're going back, because I can't do this anymore." And my girls, I have 3 daughters, yay! Oh, I hated doing the stuff the other way, but you said so. So I'm so happy. My son begins to cry, my 9-year-old son. He was then, I think he was almost 5. He has spina bifida, he walks with crutches, he's a very deep thinker. But he begins to cry. He's not happy, he's crying. So I thought, oh no, I confused the kid, I did something wrong. And he said, "Oh, Abba, please don't make me eat treif anymore. I can't do it. Don't make me eat treif." So I promised him that he would not eat treif again. And so I went back and I spent a lot of money buying back all of my Judaica. And I went right out and bought all new dishes, and we kashered the kitchen and toibled them in a lake. And I said, "We're going to convert. I know it. Somehow we're going to do it." But we didn't know how. So meanwhile, while all this is happening, this community is budding, and our old associations are over there, and they're all having a happy time and everything, and we're not there. And I'm talking to my wife, where can we go? You know, we're dying here because we're lonely and everything. The kids are lonely. And I said, "You know what? There's some good people over there that are, we're very traditional like us. And I said, maybe we'll move over there. It's cheaper anyways to live in Hudson, Wisconsin. And we'll just kind of like be on the outskirts and hang out with the people that we want to hang out until we know what to do. But unbeknownst to me, I had already been blacklisted. And I was considered dangerous. And mostly because of my radical anti-Christian and anti-Messianic views, which I expressed openly to anyone interested. I used to have people over to my house on a regular basis. My wife cooked more potato soup and breadsticks than any other woman in the history of the world to feed people who came over because they were searching and nobody else would talk to them about these things. So I was like a heresy machine, you know. I was just pumping it out, you know, far and wide. And they didn't like that. I prayed in Hebrew. They didn't like that. I wouldn't eat their food. They didn't like that. I wouldn't drive on Shabbat. I wouldn't carry on Shabbat. They didn't like that. I wouldn't let my children go to the children's programs because they taught idolatry in the children's programs. They didn't like that. But they let me come around. There was an event or, you know, this type of thing. And all the while, we didn't know what to do. The straw that broke the camel's back was that they're still our close friends. There's a woman, she's a Suffolk Jewess. She's actually, her father was black, and her mother is Irish. And on her mother's side, she has a great-grandmother named Hannah Rosenberg. I don't know if it's so much of a doubtful, or I don't know if she's so much of a Suffolk Jewess with that, but anyway, she's been drawn to Judaism, and they're friends of ours. Her husband is a Frum Goy, and her father passed away. She was never really close with her father. But she talked to me and she said, I want to sit Shiva for him. I want to mourn for my father. I think it'd be healthy for me. So I went over there and I said, what do you want to do? And I took them through the halacha, the velut, and how to sit Shiva and what's involved in that, what her sons have to do, what she has to do, you know, the whole thing. And I set up minyanim to meet in their house every day so that her sons could say Kaddish and all kinds of things. The leaders of the community absolutely lost their mind. I ended up being called into a tribunal, and they said, how dare you? And I said, how dare me what? They said, how dare you? We let you come here, and then you do this. I said, do what? You had no right to organize a Shiva in our community. I said, well, A, it's none of your business. B, they're friends of mine that asked me to do it. And C, I'm not even Messianic anymore. So how do you like that? It was kind of like I quit! And so then we went completely public after that with the fact that we just weren't Messianic anymore. We wanted to convert, and that we had to get out of there. It was pretty traumatic. My aunts and uncles and cousins and my wife's family and everything had a hard time with us. We didn't really have family much anymore. My brother didn't talk to me at that time. All of the friends in the world that we had just left with this community that we were blacklisted from. We felt pretty alone in the world. And as I was going to my job, I was the chief of maintenance at a hotel across the river in Stillwater. I just kept thinking, what am I going to do? And I kept saying to God, Abba, what am I going to do with my family? How is this going to work? So one night after work, I picked up my family and went to the local grocery store. Now you have to understand, there's nothing Jewish in Hudson. In fact, we wanted to have Geffen grape juice so that we could make Kiddush. So they special ordered it in and put it on a shelf, and because it was such a nuisance for them, they charged like $12 for a bottle of Kedem. It was a strained existence over there. So we're checking out, and my wife says, who's that? And across from the checkout at the bank, we see from the back, black yarmulke, white shirt, tzitzis, black pants, payas, and he's black. I looked over there and I just thought, this is really too much. So I told my wife, I said, I want to talk to this guy. She says, absolutely. She took the groceries and the kids out to the van, started up, and I waited for him. He turned around and said, Shalom Aleichem. And he said, Aleichem Shalom. He was just as confused as ever to see me. I worked Kibbutz Ruga at the time, and tzitzis, and I told him right away, I said, I'm not Jewish, but I study Judaism and everything else. And he said, my name is Naftali Ben Amin. He said, my Rebbe is Rebbe Mikoltorsky of Milwaukee. And I said, well, what are you doing here? Milwaukee's 6 hours away. Didn't answer my question. he just started to talk to me about his experience with conversion. And he started to talk and say, well, now when you go to Milwaukee and you're there and you know, you should just be a part of things and you have to get in there because they're not going to invite you, you know, you have to, if you want to convert, you have to really want it. And I started thinking, wow, this guy, like an angel? Is he from outer space? What in the world is going on here? And so we walked towards the door, and his final words were to me, he said, I'm a chassid of Rebbe Mikkel Twersky, you should be the next. And he walked away, and I didn't see him. Now he lives down the street from me, but I didn't see him for months. And every time I go to the grocery store, I was looking by the bank. And I started talking to my wife. I said, I think we're supposed to go to Milwaukee. That was absolutely incredible. So we started to think about Milwaukee. Then we called some friends in New York that had left the Messianic movement and converted years back. Called them up. We said, guess who? Guess what? And they said, oh, Hashem, you got to talk to this rabbi of ours. He's the head of the Young Israel down here. You got to talk to him. He's going to direct you in the right way. I was open to whatever. So I end up calling the guy. The guy says, here, talk to the CRC. I talked to the head of the CRC for about 7 seconds. We said, oh, you want to convert, you got to call back and ask for Rabbi so-and-so, and he'll take care of you. I called back. I talked to Rabbi so-and-so. He gave me the what for. Why do you want to be Jewish? Why do you want to go do that? So by the end of the conversation, he said, okay, well, you seem serious. Why do you want to go through the CRC? He said, you're going to have all kinds of bureaucracy. It's going to cost money. He said, it might never happen. Where do you live? And I said, Hudson. He goes, New York? I said, Wisconsin. He said, go to Milwaukee. So it seemed that all roads led to Milwaukee. So we began to plan to go to Milwaukee. And so I started to look for ways to go down to Milwaukee for a Shabbat. I got the number to the Rosh Beit Din there, and he must have thought I was crazy because I would leave messages on his machine. Rabbi, you got to get us out of here. We're dying out here. We got to convert. You got to help us get out of here. We got to. Okay, bye. So he ended up sending me an application and saying we'll talk and everything. And so we went to spend a Shabbat there. And after the Shabbat there, we knew that we had to go. And in our meeting with the Beit Din, they said, do you have any plans to come to Milwaukee? And I said, I'd like to be here within the month. And then, okay, that's cute, that's nice. You know, don't waste any time. Get a hold of Rabbi so-and-so over in Minneapolis and start learning or whatever. On the way out, I met somebody who needed a tenant, told him I'd talk to him. A week later, I sent him a check, signed a lease. 3 weeks later, we pulled up in a van, a week before Pesach. Everybody thought we were visiting again. And it was then that I really met and began to get in touch with Rabbi Mikkel Twersky of Milwaukee. And we got involved with the community. And, you know, everybody there swore we were Jewish. I remember having a conversation with Rabbi Vincent Twersky, Rabbi Mikkel Twersky's son, about, you know, us coming to the community or whatever. And I said, look, Rabbi, I'm here to not be an upstart. I want to be a normal Jewish family, and I just want, you know, my kids to fit in and everything else. And he goes, psh. He said, do you realize how many people are coming up to me and saying, who's the new Jewish family in town? And then when I tell them you're not Jewish, they look at me and go, what? So, after doing some learning and firming up some things, about a little over 4 months later, just before Rosh Hashanah, myself and my wife and my 4 children ended up converting and becoming Jewish. And Baruch Hashem, we came home. I became Yehudah Baruch, my wife became Ahuba Malka, and our children became Chana Basya, Shmuel Avram, Rivka Leah, and Naomi Shalamis. And so this story that I'm sharing with you, there's so much more to it. But if I leave you with anything tonight, I want to leave you with this story. This family that I counseled, and that I had the opportunity and the privilege of helping them to return, still has kids that are off the derech. They got involved in Christianity, they don't want to be religious, this type of thing. And I remember going over to their house one Erev Shabbat to say Lachadodi and all these types of things. And he was going on about how it was stupid and all this kind of thing, and Jewish and I looked him in the face and I said, do you understand what I would be willing to give to have what you were born with? I said, do you have any idea the sacrifice that my family and I have endured to just have what you just have? I said, and this is how you treat it? You throw it on the floor, you talk bad about it, it's stupid? I said, do me a favor, don't talk like that around me. And I said, and don't talk that way around your mother either. And so I've been very privileged tonight to talk to you all. I thank you for listening and for coming out tonight. And I hope that that many more people come to the shul and share a similar story, and that we all move towards the final redemption with Mashiach Tzidkenu.